She was about to be sentenced, but her dog barked just once. Then the judge froze. The gavel never fell. Judge Margaret Chen's hand froze mid-air, her weathered fingers trembling around the polished wood handle as a single bark, sharp, desperate, haunting, cut through the suffocating silence of Courtroom 4B. The sound didn't belong here. Not in this sterile chamber of justice where Emily Rodriguez sat with her wrists shackled, her dark eyes hollow with the weight of 3 months in county lockup. But there it was again. One bark, clean, purposeful, like a gunshot in a cathedral. Emily's head snapped toward the back of the courtroom, her breath catching in her throat. Through the reinforced glass partition, she could see him, Rex, her German shepherd, his massive frame pressed against Detective Martinez's legs, his amber eyes locked onto something no one else could see. The dog's ears were pinned back, not in submission but in focused intensity. His mouth hung slightly open, panting, but his body was statue still except for the barely perceptible tremor running through his muscles. "Your Honor," District Attorney Patricia Vance began, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade through silk. "This interruption is highly irregular. The defendant's pet has no business in these proceedings." Judge Chen's gavel remained suspended. Her steel-gray eyes moved from the dog to Emily, then to the gallery where 15 news cameras had turned like hungry vultures toward the glass partition. She'd been a judge for 23 years, had seen murderers confess, victims forgive, and families collapse under the weight of truth. But she'd never seen a dog look at a defendant the way Rex was looking at Emily Rodriguez, like he was trying to tell her something, like he was trying to save her. Emily's lawyer, Marcus Webb, a public defender with coffee stains on his tie and defeat in his shoulders, shuffled his papers nervously. "Your Honor, we weren't aware the K9 unit would be present during sentencing." Detective Martinez assured us. "I'm here in an unofficial capacity," Martinez interrupted from the gallery, his gravelly voice carrying the weight of 30 years on the force. His hand rested protectively on Rex's head, but the dog didn't acknowledge the touch. Rex's focus remained laser-sharp on Emily, his tail low but not tucked, his stance ready but not aggressive. The courtroom held its breath. Even the court reporters' fingers had stilled above her keyboard. Emily stared back at Rex, and for a moment, the shackles around her wrists felt lighter. 3 months ago, she'd been Officer Emily Rodriguez, decorated K9 handler, the pride of the Metropolitan Police Department. Rex had been her partner, her shadow, her salvation, in a world that had tried to break her piece by piece. Now she was. Defendant Rodriguez, accused of assault with a deadly weapon, facing 5 to 7 years in state prison. The deadly weapon? Her service pistol. The victim, her former sergeant. Rex barked again, the same sharp single note that seemed to echo off the courtroom's oak-paneled walls like a bell tolling. This time his eyes never left Emily's face, but his head turned slightly toward the prosecution table, where D.A. Vance sat with her perfect posture and her perfect case and her perfect conviction rate. Judge Chen finally lowered her gavel, but she didn't strike it against the bench. Instead, she leaned forward, her weathered hands clasped before her. "Detective Martinez, why is the K9 here?" Martinez cleared his throat, his weathered face creasing with something that might have been regret. "Rex has been struggling since Officer Rodriguez's arrest. Won't eat properly, won't work with other handlers. Department psychologist thought seeing her one more time might provide closure." "Closure," Emily whispered, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. She looked at Rex, really looked at him, and saw what 3 months had done. His coat, once lustrous, black and tan, had lost its shine. His ribs showed slightly through his uniform vest. But his eyes still held that fierce intelligence, that unwavering loyalty that had made them the most effective K9 team in the department's history. Until the night everything went wrong. Until Sergeant Kevin Walsh cornered her in the evidence locker. Until she drew her weapon and fired 2 rounds into the ceiling, and Walsh claimed she'd aimed for his head. Rex had been there that night. Rex had seen everything. D.A. Vance stood, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown timer. "Your Honor, this is clearly a ploy to generate sympathy for the defendant. Officer Rodriguez violated her oath, threatened a superior." officer, and showed a complete disregard for... Rex's bark cut her off mid-sentence, sharp and commanding. This time he took a step forward, his massive paws silent on the courtroom floor despite his 85-pound frame. Detective Martinez's hand tightened on the leash, but Rex wasn't pulling toward Emily. He was looking at D.A. Vance. The prosecutor's perfectly composed mask slipped for just a fraction of a second, and Emily caught it, a flash of something in Vance's eyes that looked almost like fear. "Your Honor," Webb said, standing slowly, "I'd like to request a brief recess." Denied. Judge Chen's voice was firm, but her eyes remained fixed on Rex. "Officer Rodriguez, do you have anything to say before sentencing?" Emily opened her mouth, then closed it. What was there to say? That she'd spent 15 years serving a system that had failed her when she needed it most. That she'd been the poster child for women in law enforcement until she dared to point a gun at the wrong man. That the K9 beside her had saved her life more times than she could count, and now she couldn't even save his. Instead, she looked at Rex and whispered, "I'm sorry, boy." Rex's tail gave a single, barely perceptible wag. Then he did something that made everyone in the courtroom freeze. He sat, perfect form, back straight, eyes alert, in the exact position he'd been trained to take when he'd found what he was looking for, when he'd detected something important. Judge Chen's knuckles went white around her gavel. "Detective Martinez, what is your K9 indicating?" Martinez looked confused, glancing down at Rex, then around the courtroom. He's not on duty, Your Honor. He's not indicating anything specific." But Emily knew better. She'd worked with Rex. For 8 years had learned to read every twitch of his ears, every shift in his posture. Rex wasn't just sitting, he was alerting. And his attention was split between two targets, Emily and someone else in the courtroom, someone who didn't want to be detected. The silence stretched taut as a wire. Outside, Seattle's autumn rain drummed against the tall windows, and the fluorescent lights hummed their endless, monotonous tune. But inside Courtroom 4B, 15 people held their breath while a German shepherd sat perfectly still, his amber eyes moving between his former handler and a truth that no one else could see. Judge Chen raised her gavel. "Emily Rodriguez, you have been found guilty of assault with a deadly weapon. Before I pass sentence," Rex barked, once sharp, final, and Judge Chen's hand froze in the air, the gavel suspended like a sword of Damocles over Emily's future. Because in that single bark, everyone in the courtroom heard the same thing Emily had been hearing for 3 months in her cell at night, echoing through her dreams like a prayer or a warning. Not yet. Not like this. The truth isn't finished with us yet. Section 2, Dual Backstory, Protagonist plus Animal. 1:800 words, 8 years earlier. The first time Emily Rodriguez saw Rex, he was trying to bite through the chain-link fence of the K9 training facility like it had personally insulted his mother. Blood matted the fur around his muzzle where he'd scraped himself against the metal, and his amber eyes held a wildness that made 3 seasoned handlers keep their distance. "He's a reject," Sergeant Torres had said, lighting his 4th cigarette of the morning. "Pure German working line, perfect breeding, but he's got issues, trust problems, won't bond with handlers. Department's thinking about putting him down." Emily watched the dog through the fence, noting how he moved, fluid despite his size, calculating despite his apparent rage. His ears swiveled toward her voice when she spoke, even though his teeth remained bared. "What happened to him?" Torres shrugged. "Previous handler died in the line of duty. Car accident, not work-related, but Rex was in the vehicle. Walked away without a scratch, but he's been like this ever since. Won't let anyone close enough to leash him, let alone train him." Emily had been on the force for 7 years then, had worked her way up from patrol to narcotics, had earned her detective shield through sheer stubborn determination and twice as many overtime hours as her male colleagues. She'd applied for K9 duty because she wanted a partner who wouldn't question her instincts or doubt her judgment based on her gender. She hadn't expected to fall in love. "Let me in," she said quietly. Torres nearly choked on his cigarette. "Rodriguez, that dog has put 2 grown men in the hospital. He's not some rescue puppy looking for belly rubs." But Emily was already walking toward the gate, her movements slow and deliberate. She'd grown up in East Seattle, had learned early that sometimes the most dangerous things were also the most worth saving. Her own father had been a walking storm cloud of rage and tequila, until the day he'd looked at his 8-year-old daughter's bruised arm and realized what he'd become. Some pain, she'd learned, came from love twisted inside out. Rex stopped biting the fence when she entered his enclosure, but he didn't back down. Instead, he watched her with those intelligent amber eyes, his muscles coiled like springs. Emily sat down cross-legged in the dirt, close enough that he could reach her if he chose to, far enough that she wasn't crowding him. They stared at each other for 47 minutes. Emily counted, because counting had always been her way of staying calm when the world felt too sharp around the edges. 47 minutes of silence, while Rex decided whether she was another handler trying to break him or something else entirely. When he finally moved, it wasn't to attack. Instead, he lowered himself to the ground, mirroring her position, his eyes never leaving her face. The wildness was still there, but underneath it, Emily saw something that made her chest tight. Recognition. Like he'd been waiting for her as long as she'd been waiting for him. "Your previous handler," she said softly, not caring that Torres was watching from outside the fence with his mouth hanging open. What was he like? Rex's ears flicked forward at the question, and Emily swore she saw something shift in his expression. Not quite grief. Dogs didn't grieve the way humans did, but a deep, persistent ache that had settled into his bones. "He loved you," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "and you loved him back, and then one day he was just gone. No goodbye. No explanation. Just gone." Rex's tail gave a single hesitant wag. Emily reached into her pocket and pulled out a protein bar, her lunch, but she'd been too nervous to eat anyway. She broke off a piece and placed it on the ground between them, not trying to hand-feed him, not making him come to her, just offering. Rex sniffed the air, his nostrils flaring. Then, moving with careful deliberation, he stretched forward and took the food. His teeth never came close to her fingers, but he didn't retreat afterward. Instead, he settled more comfortably into his prone position, as if he'd decided she might be worth the risk. "I know about Gone," Emily said, surprising herself with the admission. "My mom died when I was 12. Cancer. Took 2 years, and by the end I was glad because watching her hurt was worse than missing her. Except then I felt guilty for being glad, and the guilt was worse than everything else combined." Rex's ears were fully forward now, his head tilted slightly, as if he were listening not just to her words, but to the spaces between them. "My dad." He tried his best after that. But he was drowning, and sometimes when people are drowning, they pull down whoever's trying to save them. Not because they want to hurt you, but because they can't see anything except their own fear. She thought about her father's hands, how they'd trembled when he'd apologized for the bruises, how they'd been steady as rocks when he'd taught her to change the oil in her car, how they'd felt like sandpaper and safety when he'd walked her down the aisle at the police academy graduation. "He died 3 years ago," she continued, her voice growing quieter. "Heart attack. I was working a double shift, couldn't get to the hospital in time. He died alone, and I never got to tell him that I understood, that I forgave him, that I was proud of him for getting sober and staying that way for 15 years. Rex was fully relaxed now, his breathing deep and even. Emily realized that she was too, more relaxed than she'd been in months. There was something about talking to someone who couldn't judge your words or offer useless platitudes. Someone who just listened. "So I get it," she said, reaching out slowly to touch the blood-matted fur around his muzzle. Rex flinched but didn't. "Pull away. I get what it's like to be left behind, to have all this love with nowhere to put it." Rex's amber eyes blinked slowly, a sign of trust in dog language. Emily smiled, the first genuine smile she'd managed in weeks. "Want to try something new, boy? Want to see if we can figure out this partnership thing together?" Rex's tail wagged once, then twice. Then he did something that made Sergeant Torres drop his cigarette and reach for his radio. He rolled over onto his back, exposing his belly, the ultimate gesture of trust and submission. But Emily understood it for what it really was. A choice. Rex wasn't submitting to her authority. He was choosing to trust her with his vulnerability, the same way she'd just trusted him with hers. "Okay," she whispered, scratching his chest gently. "Okay, Rex. We'll figure it out together." 6 months. Later, their first bust had been a warehouse full of heroin and 3 armed dealers who decided they'd rather shoot their way out than go quietly. Emily had taken cover behind a shipping container, while Rex worked his way through the maze of boxes, his nose leading them straight to the hidden stash. When the shooting started, Emily's training kicked in. Assess the threat, call for backup, neutralize the danger without unnecessary force. But when she saw one of the dealers swing his pistol toward Rex, something deeper than training took over. She put 2 rounds center mass before the man could pull his trigger. Later, while the paramedics worked on the dealer, who survived barely, Rex had sat beside Emily's patrol car, his massive head resting on her knee. He didn't try to comfort her, that wasn't his job. But he stayed close, a warm, solid presence that reminded her she wasn't alone. "Good work today, Rodriguez," Sergeant Walsh had said, appearing beside her with his clipboard and his perpetual frown. "Clean shoot. That dog of yours might actually be worth the department's investment after all." Emily had bristled at the casual dismissal, but Rex had simply looked up at Walsh with those intelligent eyes and wagged his tail once, as if he were saying, "She's worth the investment too." That was the thing about Rex. He didn't just detect drugs or track suspects. He read people with an accuracy that sometimes made Emily's skin crawl. He could tell when someone was lying, when they were scared, when they were dangerous. And he could tell when they were trying to hurt someone he loved. She should have paid more attention to that particular skill. She should have noticed how Rex's hackles rose whenever Walsh got too close, how his ears flattened when the sergeant spoke, how he positioned himself between Emily and Walsh during briefings. But she'd been too busy being grateful for Walsh's approval, too focused on proving herself worthy of her position, too naive to recognize the warning signs that Rex had been broadcasting for months. By the time she understood what her partner had been trying to tell her, it was almost too late. By the time she realized that Rex's distrust of Walsh wasn't professional jealousy, but protective instinct. Walsh had already cornered her in the evidence locker, with his hands where they didn't belong, and his breath hot against her neck. By the time she drew her weapon and fired 2 warning shots into the ceiling, Rex was already at the door, barking, frantically, trying to get to her. And by the time the investigation was over, Walsh's word had carried more weight than the truth, and Emily Rodriguez, decorated officer, exemplary K-9 handler, proud daughter of a reformed drunk and a dead saint, was facing 5 to 7 years in state prison. But Rex remembered everything. Rex had seen everything. And now, sitting in that courtroom with his amber eyes locked on Emily's face, Rex was trying to tell her something that might just save them both, if only she could understand what it was. Section 3. Escalating Mystery and Bonds. 2,700 words. The first strange thing happened 3 weeks after Emily's arrest. Detective Martinez found Rex in the department's parking garage at 2:17 a.m., sitting perfectly still beside Emily's confiscated patrol car. The vehicle had been locked in evidence storage since the night of the incident, but somehow Rex had gotten past 2 locked doors and a security system to reach it. "How the hell did you get down here, boy?" Martinez had whispered, his flashlight beam catching the reflection of Rex's amber eyes in the darkness. Rex hadn't moved from his position, sitting at attention, facing the driver's side door where Emily used to slide behind the wheel at the start of each shift. His ears were pricked forward, alert, as if he were waiting for her to appear at any moment. When Martinez approached with the leash, Rex had followed obediently, but he'd looked back over his shoulder 3 times before they reached the elevator, like he was leaving someone behind. The second incident happened a week later. Officer Janet. Kowalski, Rex's temporary handler, had been running him through basic obedience drills in the training yard when he'd suddenly frozen mid-command. His head had snapped toward the administrative building, his body going rigid with attention. "Rex, heel," Kowalski had commanded, but the dog ignored her completely. Instead, Rex had begun to whine, a low, urgent sound that raised the hair on the back of Kowalski's neck. Then he'd started pulling toward the building with such force that, She'd nearly lost her grip on the leash. They'd found nothing. Empty hallways, locked offices, the usual collection of detectives nursing coffee and grudges. But Rex had remained agitated for the rest of the training session, his eyes constantly scanning the windows of the administrative building as if he could see something the humans couldn't. Maybe he smells Emily, Kowalski had suggested to Martinez. Later. Maybe she was here for a meeting with her lawyer or something, but Martinez had checked. Emily Rodriguez hadn't been in the building for 3 weeks. Her lawyer conducted meetings at the county jail, and she was forbidden from police department property, pending the resolution of her case. So what had Rex detected? The third incident was the one that made Martinez start keeping a logbook. He'd been working late, catching up on paperwork in the K9 unit's small office, when Rex had begun barking. Not the sharp, purposeful barks he used during drug searches, but frantic, almost desperate sounds that echoed through the empty building like alarms. Martinez had found Rex in the evidence locker where Emily's incident had occurred. The same room where she'd fired 2 rounds into the ceiling. The same room where Sergeant Walsh claimed she'd pointed her weapon at his head. Rex was standing in the exact spot where Emily had been that night, his nose pressed to the floor, his entire body trembling with intensity. When Martinez had called his name, Rex had looked up with an expression that could only be described as accusatory, like he was saying, "You're all missing something. You're all getting this wrong." "What is it, boy?" Martinez had whispered, kneeling, down to examine the floor where Rex was focused. The evidence team had processed the scene thoroughly, photographed every angle, collected every shell casing, documented every detail. The official report stated that Officer Rodriguez had drawn her weapon during a confrontation with Sergeant Walsh and fired 2 rounds in a threatening manner. But Rex was telling a different story. The dog's behavior was specific, purposeful. He wasn't randomly agitated. He was indicating. The same way he indicated when he'd found drugs or tracked a suspect. Rex was detecting something that the human investigators had missed. Martinez started the logbook that night, documenting every strange behavior, every unusual reaction, every moment when Rex seemed to be communicating something beyond normal canine instincts. Day 23. Rex found in parking garage beside Rodriguez's patrol car. No explanation for how he accessed secured area. Day 30. Rex exhibited extreme alertness toward administrative building during training. No apparent stimulus identified. Day 34. Rex led me to evidence locker, exhibited indication behavior at exact location of incident, focused on floor area approximately 6 feet from where Rodriguez fired shots. The entries continued, painting a picture of a dog desperately trying to communicate information that no one seemed able to understand. Day 41. Rex refused to eat for second consecutive day. Vet examination shows no physical issues. Behavioral assessment suggests anxiety related to separation from primary handler. Day 45. During routine building sweep, Rex exhibited extreme avoidance behavior when passing Sergeant Walsh's office, required forcible guidance to continue patrol. Day 52. Rex located in Rodriguez's former locker during overnight shift. Security footage shows no entry. Locker has been empty since her arrest. That last entry bothered Martinez more than the others. The K9 unit was on the 3rd floor of the police building. Individual lockers were in the basement. Even if Rex had somehow gotten out of his kennel, which was supposed to be impossible, how had he navigated 2 flights of stairs and a maze of corridors to find one specific locker among dozens? And why that locker? Emily's personal effects had been removed weeks ago. There was nothing left that should have held her scent or attracted Rex's attention, unless he wasn't following her scent, unless he was following something else entirely. Martinez started staying late more often, watching Rex, trying to understand the pattern behind his behavior. What he discovered made him question everything he thought he knew about the Rodriguez case. Rex's episodes weren't random. They were triggered. Every time Rex exhibited unusual behavior, it happened within 24 hours of Sergeant Walsh working a shift. When Walsh was off duty for his vacation week, Rex was calm, compliant, almost normal. The day Walsh returned, Rex spent 3 hours in the evidence locker, whining at the walls. When Walsh worked late shifts, Rex would pace the kennels, his agitation visible from across the room. When Walsh worked days, Rex would refuse to leave the building, as if he were standing guard. And always Rex's focus would eventually turn toward Walsh's office on the second floor. The dog would position himself in the hallway where he could see the office door, and he would wait, patient, alert, watching, like he was gathering evidence. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday night in October, 6 weeks after Emily's arrest. Martinez had been reviewing case files in the K9 office when he'd heard Rex barking from the kennel area. But these weren't the desperate, communicative barks he'd grown accustomed to. These were working barks. Alert barks. Rex had found something. Martinez had grabbed his keys and jogged toward the kennels, but Rex wasn't in his cage. Instead, he was standing outside Sergeant Walsh's office, his nose pressed to the gap beneath the door, his tail rigid with excitement. "What have you got, boy?" Martinez had whispered, approaching carefully. Rex had looked up at him, then back at the door, then at Martinez again. The message was clear. "Open it." "I can't do that, Rex. That's not our office." But Rex had begun to whine. The same urgent sound he'd made in the parking garage, in the evidence locker, in all the places where he'd tried to show them something important. This time, though, his focus was laser sharp. He wasn't confused or anxious. He was certain. Martinez had stood there for 10 minutes, watching Rex work the door like he was tracking a suspect. The dog's behavior was textbook, methodical, focused, professional. If this had been a drug bust, Martinez would have trusted. Rex's indication without question. So why was he hesitating now? Because Walsh was a sergeant. Because Walsh had filed the complaint against Emily Rodriguez. Because Walsh was respected, decorated, untouchable. Because opening that door meant admitting that maybe, just maybe, Rex knew something that the rest of them had missed. Martinez had pulled out his phone and called Officer Kowalski. "I need you." "To come in," he'd said. "Bring your key to Walsh's office." "Martinez, it's 11 p.m. What's going on?" "Rex is indicating on Walsh's office. I need a witness." 20 minutes later, Kowalski had arrived with her keys and a healthy dose of skepticism. But when she saw Rex's behavior, her expression had changed. "Jesus, Martinez, he's working." "I know, but Walsh isn't even here. His shift ended hours ago." "I know." Rex had maintained his indication for 43 minutes while they debated protocol liability and career suicide. Finally, Kowalski had made the decision for both of them. If Rex is wrong, we write it up as a training exercise. If he's right... She'd unlocked the door. Rex had bolted inside before they could stop him, his nose immediately going to work. He'd bypassed the desk, the filing cabinets, the obvious places where evidence might be hidden. Instead, he'd gone straight to a small storage cabinet in the corner, the kind used for personal items, gym clothes, extra uniforms, and there, wedged behind a stack of old departmental manuals, Rex had found Emily Rodriguez's missing body camera. The camera that should have been in evidence storage with the rest of her gear. The camera that would have recorded everything that happened in the evidence locker the night she'd drawn her weapon. The camera that had mysteriously malfunctioned according to the official report. Martinez had stared at the device in his gloved hands, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Kowalski, call the tech unit. Call them now." "Martinez, if that camera were... I know. If it shows what I think it shows, I know." Rex had sat down beside the cabinet, his job done, his tail wagging slightly. For the first time since Emily's arrest, he looked satisfied, content, like he'd finally managed to tell them what he'd been trying to say all along. The camera's memory card was intact, the footage was recoverable, and when the tech unit extracted the video files 3 days later, they found 18 minutes of crystal-clear audio and video from the night Emily Rodriguez had drawn her weapon in the evidence locker. 18 minutes that told a very different story than the one Sergeant Walsh had sworn to under oath. 18 minutes that showed Emily Rodriguez not as an aggressor, but as a victim. 18 minutes that revealed Sergeant Kevin Walsh as a predator who had cornered a female officer attempted to sexually assault her, and then filed false charges when she'd defended herself. 18 minutes that proved Rex had been right all along, but the camera footage raised as many questions as it answered. How had Walsh gotten possession of Emily's body camera? Why had he kept it instead of destroying it? And most importantly, why had Rex been able to find it when trained investigators hadn't even known it existed? As Martinez sat in his car outside the police station that night, watching Rex sleep peacefully in the back seat, for the first time in weeks, he realized that the case was far from over. Because if Walsh had been willing to hide evidence and file false charges to cover up one crime, what else might he have done? And if Rex could detect lies and hidden evidence with such precision, what other secrets might be waiting to be discovered? The dog opened one amber eye and looked at Martinez in the rearview mirror, and Martinez could swear he saw something almost human in that gaze, something that looked like anticipation, like Rex knew that the real investigation was just beginning. The two. News broke on a Thursday morning with all the subtlety of a freight train through a china shop. Police sergeant arrested in evidence tampering scandal. The Seattle Times headline screamed across every newsstand and social media feed in the city. By noon, every local news station was running the story, complete with file footage of Sergeant Kevin Walsh's commendations and Emily Rodriguez's K-9 unit achievements. Emily heard about it from her cellmate, Carmen, who'd been watching the Common Room television when the story broke. "Girl, your dog just saved your ass," Carmen had said, sliding onto Emily's narrow bunk with a grin that revealed 2 gold teeth. "That son of a bitch sergeant got arrested this morning. Something about hiding evidence and filing false charges." Emily had stared at the ceiling of her cell, processing the information with the slow, careful deliberation of someone who'd learned not to hope too quickly. 3 months of county jail had taught her that good news was usually followed by worse. News and salvation was just another word for delayed disappointment. But when Marcus Webb, her public defender, arrived that afternoon with tears in his eyes and dismissal papers in his briefcase, Emily had allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the nightmare was over. "The prosecutor's office is dropping all charges," Webb had said, his voice trembling with what might have been relief or shock. "The body camera footage proves your account of events completely. Walsh has been arrested on multiple charges, including sexual assault, evidence tampering, and perjury." Emily had nodded slowly, her hands steady as she signed the paperwork. "What happens now?" "Now, you go home. Your job, your pension, your reputation, it's all being restored. The department's talking about commendations, maybe even a promotion. You're going to be fine, Emily. You're going to be better than fine." But as Emily walked out of the King County Jail into the October afternoon, breathing free air for the first time in 93 days, she didn't feel fine. She felt hollow, scraped clean, like a house after a fire where the structure remained, but everything inside had been reduced to ash. Detective Martinez was waiting for her in the parking lot, leaning against his unmarked sedan with Rex sitting patiently at his side. The dog's ears pricked forward when he saw her, and his tail began a slow, measured wag that spoke of joy, tempered by months of separation. "Hey, partner," Emily said softly, kneeling down as Rex approached. The reunion was quieter than she'd expected. Rex pressed against her legs, his solid warmth a reminder of loyalty that transcended human complications, but he didn't jump or bark or display the exuberant enthusiasm she'd expected. Instead, he seemed to study her with those amber eyes, as if checking to make sure all the important pieces were still in place. "He missed you," Martinez said unnecessarily. "I missed him too." Emily scratched behind Rex's ears, noting how his coat had regained its luster, how his ribs no longer showed through his uniform vest. Someone had been taking good care of him. "Thank you for everything." Martinez shifted uncomfortably. "It was all Rex. That dog of yours is smarter than half the detectives in the building. Hell, he might be smarter than all of them." They drove back to Emily's apartment in comfortable silence. Rex stretched across the back seat with his head resting on Emily's shoulder. Her small one-bedroom looked exactly as she'd left it. Bills stacked on the kitchen counter, dishes in the sink, her spare uniform hanging in the closet like a ghost of her former life. But it felt different, smaller, like she'd outgrown it during her time away. "Department wants you back as soon as you're ready," Martinez said from the doorway. "Full reinstatement, back pay, the works. Captain Morrison specifically requested that you and Rex resume your partnership." Emily nodded, but the idea of returning to the job felt surreal, like putting on clothes that no longer fit properly. "What about Walsh?" "Remanded without bail. DA's office thinks they can make charges stick for sexual assault, evidence tampering, perjury, and abuse of authority. He's looking at 15 to 20 if convicted." "Good." The word came out harder than Emily intended. Martinez hesitated. "There's something else, the body camera footage. It shows more than just what happened that night." Emily looked up from where she was unpacking Rex's food bowls. "What do you mean?" "The camera was recording for several hours before the incident. There's footage of Walsh talking to other officers, making phone calls, discussing cases. The tech unit is going through everything, but it looks like Walsh might have been involved in evidence manipulation for months, maybe years." A chill ran down Emily's spine. "How many cases?" "They don't know yet. Could be dozens. The internal affairs investigation is going to be massive." Emily sank into her kitchen chair, Rex immediately moving to sit beside her, his head resting on her knee. The implications were staggering. If Walsh had been manipulating evidence in multiple cases, it meant innocent people might have been convicted, guilty people might have gone free, and the entire department's credibility was compromised. "Emily," Martinez said gently, "you're going to be asked to testify. Not just about what happened to you, but about anything you might have observed about Walsh's conduct over the years. Any irregularities, any cases that seemed off, any times Rex reacted strangely to him." "Rex." Emily looked down at her partner, remembering all the times he'd shown discomfort around Walsh, all the subtle warnings she'd ignored because she'd been too focused on proving herself to trust her dog's instincts. "Rex knew," she said quietly. "He knew something was wrong with Walsh long before I did." "Dogs don't lie," Martinez replied. "Maybe we should have been paying more attention." That evening, Emily sat on her couch with Rex curled beside her, watching the news coverage of Walsh's arrest. The media was portraying it as a victory for justice, a vindication of the system's ability to correct its mistakes. But Emily felt no sense of triumph, no satisfaction in Walsh's downfall. Instead, she felt exhausted, bone-deep, soul-level tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. Her phone rang constantly, reporters requesting interviews, colleagues offering congratulations, friends expressing outrage on her behalf. She let them all go to voicemail. The only call she answered was from her captain, confirming her return to duty the following Monday. "Take the weekend to readjust," Captain Morrison had said. "But we need you back, Rodriguez. The department needs some good news, and you and Rex are about as good as it gets." Emily returned to duty on a Monday morning that felt like stepping into someone else's life. The police station buzzed with an energy she didn't recognize, half celebration, half nervous tension. Officers who'd barely acknowledged her existence before Walsh's arrest now offered coffee, congratulations, and carefully worded apologies that never quite addressed their complicity in her ordeal. Rex seemed to sense the shift too. As they walked through the building toward the K9 unit, his ears swiveled constantly, cataloging sounds and scents with hypervigilant attention. When they passed Walsh's former office, now sealed with yellow tape and marked as a crime scene, Rex paused, his nose working the air with methodical precision. "Still processing that space, boy," Emily murmured, but Rex didn't respond with his usual acknowledgement. Instead, he turned toward the administrative wing, his body going rigid with the same focused attention she'd seen in the courtroom. Detective Martinez appeared at Emily's elbow, coffee in hand and dark circles under his eyes. "He's been doing that since we found the camera," he said quietly, acting like there's more to find. "Maybe there is." Martinez studied her face. "You think Walsh's evidence tampering goes deeper than what we've already uncovered?" Emily watched Rex, who was now pulling gently toward a corridor she'd never paid much attention to, the route that led to the records department and internal affairs. "I think Rex has been trying to tell us something for months, and we've only scratched the surface." The next 3 hours were spent reviewing case files, looking for patterns in Walsh's behavior that might indicate broader corruption. What they found painted a picture that made Emily's stomach churn, with a familiar mixture of rage and helplessness. Over the past 5 years, Walsh had been involved in evidence processing for 127 cases. Of those, 31 had resulted in convictions that relied heavily on physical evidence Walsh had personally catalogued. Another 18 cases had been dismissed due to procedural errors or compromised evidence chains, all involving suspects with connections to known criminal organizations. "Look at this," Martinez said, sliding a file across the desk. "Jerome Washington, arrested 3 years ago for armed robbery. Case dismissed when his fingerprints mysteriously disappeared from evidence storage. Guess who was the supervising officer on evidence processing?" Emily scanned the report, her blood growing colder with each detail. "Walsh, and look at the arresting officer, Detective Sarah Chen. She's been pushing for corruption investigations in this department for years." "Chen transferred to narcotics 6 months ago," Martinez noted, "right after she filed a formal complaint about irregularities in evidence handling." Rex, who had been lying quietly beside Emily's desk, suddenly raised his head. His ears pricked forward, and he made a soft whining sound that Emily had learned to interpret as urgent communication. "What is it, boy?" Rex stood and walked to the window overlooking the parking lot. His posture was alert but not aggressive, the stance he took when tracking a familiar scent. Emily joined him at the window and saw Detective Chen walking toward the building, her stride purposeful and her expression grim. 20 minutes later, Chen sat across from Emily and Martinez in the small conference room, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had long since gone cold. "I've been waiting 3 years for someone to take Walsh seriously," Chen said without preamble. "I documented every irregularity, every suspicious coincidence, every case that went sideways under his supervision. Internal affairs buried my complaints every time." Emily leaned forward. "Why didn't you come forward after his arrest?" Chen's laugh was bitter. "Because I didn't know who else was involved. Walsh wasn't operating alone. This kind of systematic evidence manipulation requires help. Multiple people had to look the other way, sign off on procedures, maintain the cover-up. Rex had positioned himself between Chen and the door, not blocking her exit, but clearly monitoring her stress levels. Dogs could detect changes in human biochemistry that preceded lies or deception, and Rex's calm demeanor suggested Chen was telling the truth. "What do you need from us?" Martinez asked. "Access to the full body camera footage, not just the 18 minutes from Emily's incident, but everything the tech unit recovered. If Walsh was recording himself during other criminal activities, there might be evidence of his associates." Emily felt a chill of recognition. "The footage shows more than just my case? Hours of material." Walsh apparently forgot the camera was recording during several phone conversations, meetings with informants, and discussions with other officers. The DA's office is sitting on most of it, claiming they need time to verify authenticity, but I think they're scared of what else they might find. Rex moved closer to Chen, his amber eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made the detective shift uncomfortably. "Your dog is staring at me," Chen observed. "He's reading you," Emily replied. "Rex can detect stress, deception, fear, changes in human biochemistry that most people miss. Right now he's picking up something that's making him curious." Chen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I think Walsh killed someone." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Martinez set down his coffee cup with exaggerated care, while Emily felt her world tilt sideways for the second time in 4 months. "Explain," Emily said. "Marcus Hendricks, small-time dealer, got arrested 2 years ago for possession with intent to distribute. Walsh processed the evidence and Hendricks made bail. 3 days later, Hendricks was found dead in his apartment, apparent overdose. Case closed." "People overdose," Martinez said carefully, "especially dealers. Hendricks had been clean for 8 months. I know because he was my informant." Chen's hands were shaking now, and Rex moved closer, his presence offering comfort without judgment. He was going to testify about evidence tampering in other cases. He specifically mentioned Walsh by name. Emily's blood turned to ice water. "So you have proof?" "I have recordings of our conversations. Hendricks was scared, said Walsh had approached him about changing his testimony in exchange for a reduced sentence. When Hendricks refused, Walsh threatened him. "And you didn't report." "This?" Chen's eyes flashed with anger. "I tried. Filed a report with IA the day after Hendricks died. The report disappeared. When I asked about it, I was told there was no record of any such filing. A week later, I was transferred to narcotics for my own professional development." Rex was fully alert now, his body language suggesting he was processing multiple stress signatures in the room. But instead of growing agitated, he seemed to be offering comfort, moving between the three humans, his presence steady and reassuring. "If Walsh killed your informant," Martinez said slowly, "then the body camera footage might contain evidence of premeditation, conspiracy, or cover-up activities." "Exactly. And if that footage disappears or gets ruled inadmissible, Walsh walks on the murder charge." Emily stood abruptly, Rex immediately rising to flank her. "We need to see that footage. All of it. The DA's office won't release it without a court order." "Then we get a court order." Chen shook her head. "You don't understand. The corruption goes higher than Walsh. Someone in the DA's office is protecting him, has to be, or my original complaints wouldn't have disappeared so completely." Emily looked down at Rex, who was watching all three humans with the patient attention of someone waiting for them to catch up to conclusions he'd reached long ago. "Rex found the camera," she said quietly. "He led Martinez straight to it, like he knew exactly where to look. What if Walsh wasn't just hiding evidence? What if he was collecting it?" Martinez frowned. "What do you mean?" "Blackmail material, insurance policies. If Walsh was taking bribes to manipulate evidence, he'd want leverage over his associates. Recording conversations, keeping documentation of who paid him, when, and for what." Chen's eyes widened. "You think the camera footage shows Walsh's co-conspirators?" "Think Rex has been trying to tell us that Walsh's office contained more than just my body camera." Emily knelt beside her partner, scratching behind his ears. "Haven't you, boy? There's more to find, isn't there?" Rex's tail wagged once, a measured, deliberate response that felt like confirmation. That afternoon, Emily found herself back in Courtroom 4B, this time as a witness rather than a defendant. The emergency hearing had been called to determine whether the full body camera footage could be released to investigators, and the gallery was packed with reporters, police officers, and courthouse regulars drawn by the scent of scandal. Judge Chen, no relation to Detective Chen despite the shared surname, presided with the same weathered authority Emily remembered from her sentencing hearing. The judge's eyes found Emily in the gallery, and for a moment, something that might have been approval flickered across her features. "Your Honor," Assistant District Attorney Patricia Vance argued, "releasing the full footage at this time would compromise ongoing investigations and potentially violate the privacy rights of individuals who appear in the recordings without their knowledge or consent." Emily noticed that Vance seemed different, less composed than she'd been during the original proceedings, her perfect posture slightly rigid with tension. More importantly, Rex noticed too. From his position beside Emily, in the gallery, the dog's attention was focused laser-sharp on the prosecutor, his ears forward and his body still. "Furthermore," Vance continued, "the footage contains sensitive information about ongoing criminal investigations that could be compromised if made public." Defense attorney Marcus Webb, looking more confident than Emily had ever seen him, stood to respond. "Your Honor, my client has the right to review all evidence related to the charges against former Sergeant Walsh. Additionally, the footage may contain exculpatory evidence relevant to other pending cases throughout the department." Judge Chen considered both arguments, her weathered hands clasped before her. "Ms. Vance, what specific harm would result from releasing the footage to defense counsel under protective order?" Vance hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, but Emily caught it. More importantly, Rex caught it. The dog's posture shifted, subtly, his head tilting slightly as he processed whatever changes in Vance's biochemical signature had triggered his attention. "The footage contains references to ongoing narcotics investigations, Your Honor. Premature disclosure could jeopardize undercover operations and endanger the lives of confidential informants." It was a reasonable argument, but Rex's reaction suggested something else was happening. The dog had begun the subtle panting that indicated heightened stress detection, not his own stress, but someone else's. Judge Chen made her ruling with the decisive authority of someone who'd seen too many lawyers try to hide inconvenient truths. The footage will be released to defense counsel under protective order, with provisions for redacting information that genuinely compromises ongoing investigations. However, I'm not inclined to accept blanket claims of investigative sensitivity without specific justification. Emily saw Vance's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. She also saw Rex's ears flatten slightly, a sign that whatever stress signature he'd been detecting had just intensified. As the courtroom emptied, Emily lingered in the gallery, watching the key players file out. Vance moved quickly, her heels clicking against the marble floor with staccato urgency. Detective Chen emerged from the witness section, her expression cautiously optimistic. Martinez appeared at Emily's elbow, Rex automatically positioning himself between his handler and the crowd. "Think we'll get what we need from the footage?" Martinez asked. Emily watched Vance disappear through the courtroom doors, Rex's amber eyes tracking the prosecutor's movement with predatory focus. "I think we're going to get more than we bargained for," Emily replied, "and I think Rex knows exactly what that's going to be." The footage arrived on a Thursday morning in 17 encrypted files, each requiring separate passwords and digital signatures to access. Emily Martinez and Detective Chen had commandeered a small conference room in the basement of the police station, far from the administrative offices and potential eavesdroppers. Rex lay beneath the conference table, his presence steady and reassuring as the three investigators prepared to dive into what might be the most damning evidence any of them had ever encountered. "Before we start," Chen said, her finger hovering over the first file, "I need you both to understand something. What we're about to see could end careers, destroy lives, and potentially put us all in danger. If Walsh was collecting blackmail, material on his associates, those associates aren't going to want this information made public." Martinez nodded grimly. "We're past the point of no return anyway. Walsh tried to destroy Emily's life to cover his tracks, if he was willing to go. That far, he won't hesitate to go further if he feels cornered." Emily reached down to scratch Rex's ears, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "What's our protocol if we find evidence of additional crimes? Document everything, preserve chain of custody, and pray we can trust whoever we report it to," Chen replied. "Because if this conspiracy reaches as high as I think it does, we might not have many allies left in the system." The first file contained the footage Emily had already seen, her confrontation with Walsh in the evidence locker, the attempted assault, her defensive response. But watching it again, with the benefit of context and Rex's behavioral cues, Emily noticed details she'd missed before. Walsh's confidence during the assault wasn't just predatory, it was practiced. His movements, his positioning, his verbal manipulation tactics all suggested this wasn't his first such encounter. More disturbing, his reaction to Emily's resistance was immediate escalation to threats about her career, her pension, her future. "In law enforcement, he's done this before," Emily said quietly. "Multiple times," Chen agreed. "Look at his body language when you draw your weapon. He's not surprised or afraid, he's calculating, already planning his next move." The second file was where things got interesting. The timestamp showed Walsh in his office 3 hours after Emily's arrest, talking on his cell phone with someone, whose voice was distorted by poor audio quality. "Situation is contained," Walsh was saying, pacing behind his desk while the body camera recorded from its position on his equipment belt. "Rodriguez won't be a problem. I've got 3 witnesses who will testify she was unstable, drinking on duty, making threats about the department." The voice on the other end was impossible to make out clearly, but Walsh's responses painted a clear picture of the conversation. "No, the dog can't testify," Walsh said with a harsh laugh. "And even if Rodriguez tries to claim she was defending herself, it's her word against mine and a stack of documented disciplinary issues I've been building for months." Rex raised his head from beneath the table, his ears pricked forward as if he could hear something in the audio that the humans were missing. "What is it, boy?" Emily asked. Rex moved closer to the laptop speakers, his head tilted in the characteristic pose he adopted when processing complex auditory information. After a moment, He returned to his position, but his alertness remained heightened. The third file showed Walsh meeting with someone in the police station parking garage, a figure whose face was never clearly visible to the camera, but whose expensive shoes and tailored pants suggested someone with significant resources. "Need the Henderson case to go away," the figure was saying, passing Walsh a thick envelope. "My client can't afford to have that evidence surface." "Consider it handled," Walsh replied, pocketing the envelope without counting its contents. "But this is the last time we do business like this. Too many people are asking questions about evidence irregularities. Then maybe it's time to eliminate the people asking questions." Emily felt her blood turn to ice water. Martinez cursed under his breath. Chen rewound the audio and played it again, her face pale with recognition. "That's not a suggestion," Chen said quietly. "That's an order." The fourth file was a phone conversation that made Emily's hands shake with rage. "Hendrick's problem is resolved," Walsh was reporting to someone. "Apparent overdose. Very tragic. The ME won't look too closely if we provide the right incentives." The voice on the other end was clearer this time, a woman's voice, cultured and authoritative. "What about the evidence he claimed to have?" "Never existed. Hendricks was a junkie and a liar." His word wouldn't have held up in court anyway. "Good. The Richardson case proceeds as planned, then." Emily looked at Chen, who had gone completely white. "Richardson was one of my cases," Chen whispered. "Major drug trafficking conviction that got overturned on appeal. The evidence chain was compromised, and Richardson walked free despite being caught with 50 kilograms of heroin." "Richardson paid Walsh to make that evidence disappear," Martinez said grimly, "and they killed Hendricks. To keep him quiet about it." "Quiet about it." Rex had moved closer to Emily, his body pressed against her legs in a gesture of comfort and protection, but his eyes remained fixed on the laptop screen, as if he were waiting for something specific to appear. The fifth file provided that something. For Niedermar. Timestamp was from 6 months ago, long before Emily's incident with Walsh. The setting was Walsh's office, but he wasn't alone. Assistant District Attorney Patricia Vance sat across from his desk, her perfect posture and professional demeanor intact as she discussed the systematic corruption of the justice system with the casual tone most people reserved for discussing the weather. "Chen is becoming a problem," Vance was saying. "Her persistent questions about evidence handling are drawing attention from internal affairs." "IA is handled," Walsh replied. "Captain Morrison makes sure any complaints about my unit get buried or reassigned." Emily's world tilted sideways. Captain Morrison, the man who'd personally requested her return to duty, who'd spoken about the department needing good news, was part of the conspiracy. "What about the federal task force?" Vance continued. "They're starting to notice patterns in conviction rates, particularly in cases involving organized crime defendants. The feds can notice all they want. Without access to our evidence files, they can't prove anything, and if they get too close, we have contingency plans. Elimination contingencies? Whatever it takes to protect the operation." Rex was fully alert now, his amber eyes fixed on Vance's image on the laptop screen. His lip curled slightly, not a snarl but the subtle expression dogs made when processing scents associated with danger. The sixth file was a recording from just 2 weeks ago, after Walsh's arrest, after Emily's release, after the investigation, had supposedly been contained. Vance was in Walsh's former office, speaking to someone on the phone while she searched through files that should have been sealed as evidence. "Need to make sure nothing leads back to the Richardson payments," she was saying. "If the defense team gets access to Walsh's financial records, they'll trace the money directly to our clients." "What about the dog handler?" the voice on the phone asked. "Rodriguez? She's a hero now, completely above suspicion. Perfect cover if we need to plant evidence or eliminate witnesses. No one would suspect the wrongfully convicted police officer." Emily felt sick. They'd planned to use her as an unknowing asset in their continuing corruption. And if she becomes a problem? "Dogs have accidents all the time," Vance replied coldly. "Especially K9s in dangerous situations. Rodriguez would be devastated by the loss of her partner, might even take early retirement to cope with the trauma." Rex was on his feet now, a low growl rumbling in his chest. not directed at the humans in the room, but at the laptop screen showing Vance's cold calculation of his potential murder. Emily's hands were shaking as she reached for her phone. "We have to call someone. FBI, state police, someone outside the department." "Who?" Chen asked desperately. "We don't know how far this goes. Morrison's involved. Vance is involved, probably half the detective bureau for all we know." Martinez was already scrolling through the remaining files. "There's more. 11 more recordings going back 3 years. This isn't just about evidence. Tampering. This is about a systematic criminal organization operating inside our justice system." They spent the next 4 hours documenting everything, copying files to multiple encrypted drives, and building a comprehensive case file that painted a picture of corruption so extensive it seemed almost impossible to believe. The conspiracy involved at least 12 police officers, 3 prosecutors, 2 judges, and an unknown number of criminal defense attorneys who'd been paid to provide inadequate representation to certain defendants. The organization had fixed cases, eliminated witnesses, planted evidence, and stolen millions of dollars in bribes and protection money. Walsh hadn't just been a corrupt cop, he'd been the operations manager for a criminal enterprise that had perverted justice for years. "We need protection," Chen said as they prepared to leave the conference room. "If Vance realizes we have this evidence, she'll move against us immediately. And if she's willing to kill a drug dealer to maintain the cover-up, she won't hesitate. To eliminate 3 police officers." Emily looked down at Rex, who had remained alert and protective throughout the entire session. "She threatened to kill Rex to get to me." "Which means she doesn't understand what she's dealing with," Martinez said grimly. "Rex isn't just Emily's partner. He's the key witness who started unraveling this entire conspiracy. He's smarter than most humans, and he's been gathering evidence longer than any of us realized." Rex's tail wagged once, his measured response that seemed to acknowledge their recognition of his intelligence. "So what's our next move?" Emily asked. Chen pulled out her phone. "I have a contact at the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. Someone I trust. Someone who's been investigating organized crime connections to municipal government for years. Can we trust them?" "We don't have a choice, but we're not going in alone." Chen looked at Rex, who was watching all 3 humans with patient attention. "We're bringing our secret weapon." Emily knelt beside Rex, scratching behind his ears as she whispered, "Ready for one more job, partner? Ready to help us catch the real bad guys?" Rex's amber eyes seemed to glow with anticipation, and his tail wagged with more enthusiasm than Emily had seen since before her arrest. For the first time in months, Emily felt like they might actually win. The meeting was set for Friday at dawn in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of Seattle, neutral ground that would provide cover for their conversation while offering multiple escape routes if the situation went sideways. FBI Special Agent Sarah Blackwood arrived in an unmarked sedan, her badge clearly visible on her belt, and her expression cautiously professional. Emily, Martinez, and Chen had spent the night in a cheap motel, taking turns on watch duty, while Rex provided early warning for any approaching threats. "Before we begin," Agent Blackwood said, settling into the diner booth across from the 3 officers, "I need to know that you understand the magnitude of what you're alleging. A conspiracy involving multiple law enforcement agencies, the prosecutor's office, and potentially the judiciary would represent one of the largest corruption cases in Washington state history." Rex lay beneath the table, his presence calming, but alert. Emily noticed that his attention was focused on the diner's entrance and the parking lot beyond, maintaining his protective vigilance even in what should have been a safe environment. "We understand," Emily replied, sliding the encrypted drive across the table, "and we have evidence to support every allegation." Agent Blackwood reviewed the files with the methodical attention of someone accustomed to building cases that would survive federal court scrutiny. Her expression grew progressively grimmer as she absorbed the scope of the conspiracy documented in Walsh's recordings. "This is extensive," she said finally, "but most of it would be considered hearsay evidence. Walsh's recordings of phone conversations, meetings with unidentified co-conspirators, discussions of criminal activity, it's all valuable intelligence but not necessarily admissible in federal court." Chen leaned forward urgently. "What about the murder of Marcus Hendricks? Walsh essentially confesses to arranging his death. Circumstantial. The recording shows Walsh claiming responsibility, but we'd need physical evidence, witnesses, or corroborating documentation to prove murder charges. Agent Blackwood's expression softened slightly. I'm not saying this isn't valuable. It absolutely is. But building a federal case requires more than recordings of criminals discussing their crimes. Emily felt a familiar sinking sensation, the same helplessness she'd experienced during her original arrest. So they get away with it? I didn't say that. Agent Blackwood's voice carried a hint of steel. What you've provided gives us probable cause for search warrants, wiretap authorizations, and financial investigations. Walsh's recordings are the roadmap. Now we use them to gather admissible evidence. Rex raised his head from beneath the table, his ears pricked forward in alert attention. A moment later, Emily heard what had caught his attention, the distinctive sound of multiple vehicle doors slamming in the parking lot. "Company," Martinez said quietly, his hand moving instinctively toward his service weapon. Through the diner's windows, Emily saw 3 black SUVs arranged in a semicircle around Agent Blackwood's sedan. The vehicle's occupants remained inside, but their positioning was clearly tactical, designed to control access and escape routes. "Federal backup?" Emily asked hopefully. Agent Blackwood shook her head, her expression grim. "I came alone. Those aren't my people." Rex was fully alert now, his body language indicating the presence of multiple stress signatures and potential threats. He moved closer to Emily, positioning himself between her and the diner's entrance. "They found us," Chen whispered. Emily's phone buzzed with an incoming text message. The number was unfamiliar, but the message was chillingly clear. "Exit through the kitchen. Leave the FBI agent. Bring the evidence. You have 3 minutes." "They want the evidence," Emily said, showing the message to the others. Agent Blackwood was already on her radio, calling for backup with terse professional language, but her expression suggested help wouldn't arrive in time to make a difference. "How did they track us here?" "Doesn't matter now," Martinez said, scanning the diner for alternative exits. "What matters is getting out alive." Rex had moved to the front of the booth, his amber eyes fixed on something beyond the windows that the humans couldn't see. His posture was focused but not aggressive, the stance he took when tracking rather than confronting. "He's picking up something specific," Emily said, recognizing her partner's behavior. "Not just general threat assessment." "What is it, boy?" Martinez asked. Rex turned toward the diner's rear exit, then back toward the front, his head moving in a pattern that suggested he was tracking multiple scent trails or audio signatures. Emily's second text arrived 30 seconds later. "Time's up. Come outside now or we come inside." Your choice how many innocent people get hurt. The diner was nearly empty, just an elderly couple in a corner booth and a lone trucker at the counter. But even those few lives were too many to risk. Agent Blackwood made the decision for all of them. "I'll go out front, create a distraction. You 3 take the evidence and exit through the kitchen. My backup will be here soon." "We don't leave partners behind," Emily said firmly. "You're not leaving me behind. You're completing the mission." Agent Blackwood's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making life-or-death decisions. "Get that evidence to federal prosecutors and make sure these bastards pay for what they've done." Rex moved decisively toward the kitchen, exit looking back over his shoulder with an expression that clearly communicated urgency. But instead of the fear or anxiety Emily expected, she saw something else in his amber eyes. Anticipation, like he had a plan. "Rex knows something," Emily said suddenly. "He's not just reacting to the threat, he's working towards something specific." Martinez frowned. "What do you mean?" Emily watched her partner's behavior, noting the subtle signs she'd learned to read over 8 years of partnership. Rex wasn't displaying the stress signals she'd expect from a dog sensing immediate danger. Instead, he was showing the focused attention he reserved for active investigations. He's tracking someone specific, someone he recognizes. The realization hit Emily like a physical blow. "Vance, she's here!" Rex's tail wagged once, his measured acknowledgement that Emily had correctly interpreted his behavior. "That's impossible," Chen said. "How would Vance know about this meeting?" Emily's blood turned to ice water as the implications sank in. Someone told her. Someone who knew about the meeting, about the evidence transfer, about our contact with the FBI. Agent Blackwood's face went pale. Someone in my office is compromised. Rex moved toward the kitchen with increasing urgency, but his focus remained split between the rear exit and something else, a scent or sound that was drawing his attention toward the diner's front section. Emily's third text was from a different number. Agent Blackwood's backup isn't coming. Walk out the front door now or everyone in the diner dies. You have 60 seconds. They're inside the building, Martinez said, his weapon drawn but held low to avoid alarming the civilian customers. Emily looked at Rex, who was now positioned at the boundary between the dining area and the kitchen, his body language indicating the presence of threats from multiple directions. We're surrounded, she said quietly. Front, back, probably sides too. Agent Blackwood was coordinating with someone on her radio, but her expression suggested the response wasn't encouraging. Local backup is 20 minutes out. FBI tactical team is 45 minutes. We don't have 20 minutes, Chen said. Emily knelt beside Rex, placing her hand on his head while she processed their options. Surrender and hope. Vance honored her word about sparing innocent lives. Fight their way out and risk a shootout in a public space. Or trust that Rex's behavior indicated a third option she wasn't seeing yet. What do you know that we don't, partner? She whispered. Rex looked directly into her eyes, then toward the front of the diner, then back to her face. His message was, clear, follow me, trust me. I know how to end this. Emily made her decision. We go with Rex. Whatever he's planning, we follow his lead. Agent Blackwood started to protest, but Emily was already moving toward the front of the diner, Rex at her side, and the evidence drive secured in her jacket pocket. Sometimes, Emily reflected, justice had 4 legs and amber eyes. And sometimes, that was exactly what the world needed.